Hey, I'm Chicken Johnny, and you're in the shed with Chicken Johnny this morning. We might go out into the garden a little bit later, but right now I'd like to talk to you about the top 5 reasons people quit gardening, and maybe even before they get started. So, 5 reasons why people, let's say, fail at gardening. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to give you one reason you will always succeed. If you have this particular attitude, you'll continue to garden and you will succeed at gardening. Guaranteed. So, the number one reason people fail, or the first reason people fail at gardening. They start at the wrong time. They start in the spring. Now if you wait until Walmart or Home Depot or whoever you buy your seedlings, your transplants, and your seeds from, if you wait until they have all of their seeds and their potato seeds and onion starts and all of that, if you wait until that's ready for you, you've missed an awful lot of work. You really need to start in the fall or midsummer, or maybe even the spring of the year before. There's a lot of work to do in gardening, and one of the things that will help you a lot is if you prepare the ground properly to begin with. Now, I'm not just talking about digging and making the ground soft. I'm talking about eliminating weed pressure, trying to eliminate insect pressure. And of course, every context is going to be slightly different, and some people are going to have an easier time. For example, if you're planting a 10 by 10 garden, well, what I'm saying may not be as necessary. It'll still be helpful. But if you're planting a large garden where you're going to try to grow enough vegetables to feed your family, or possibly enough to sell at the market, you need to get started at least a year before you plant your first seed. You need to start watching YouTube videos. Hey, I'm not trying to self-promote, but I will tell you this. You can learn more on YouTube than you can learn at university about gardening, truly. You can learn good things and bad things. Now, there's a bunch of garden sites out there. I'm not going to try to list all of them, but I will say that if you go to Shed Wars, if you just do hashtag Shed Wars and you watch some of those videos, there's a lot of guys out there who have a great information about the gardening itself, and specifically about what plants to grow and what the different plants are going to look like as they mature. And you can get a lot of insight from them. There's also places like the M.I. Gardener. I spent a lot of time listening to him. And Haas Tools has a really good site. So that's where you start. You start by doing your research. Learn about gardening. Now, when I started, it wasn't from the internet. We were reading books. Lots and lots of books and magazines. And Victory Garden on WTTW was helpful. But nowadays, there's no excuse to not do the research. Watch as many of the videos out there as you can. Then prepare your ground. Now, if you're going to start in the spring, you're not going to be able to do much to prepare your ground. You'll be able to turn it over, and really that's the extent of it. But if you start the year before, the fall before, well, you can do things like you can solarize. You can put plastic down in the area where you're going to plant. And if you've got a hot enough, long enough season, the plastic will virtually kill all of the weeds. And the next year, you're going to be starting with a very stale seed bed. In my part of the country, we can't really solarize. We don't have a long enough season. We don't have a hot enough season. So we oculate the soil. I put a black tarp down on a lot of the areas where I garden, and that black tarp oculates the soil. Now just go ahead and Google that word oculate and you'll understand what it means. But it prepares the soil for planting so that you're planting into a relatively stale seed bed that hasn't been tilled up and disturbed. Now, see, my method of gardening now uses heavy tillage. And I mean really heavy tillage. I deep bottom plow my fields every 3 years. That'll come up this fall. We'll deep bottom plow the field, and then I will till it regularly. And that seems to work the best for me. Now, some people will use cover crops, and that's fine if you've got a season that's long enough to have a garden and then plant in a cover crop. Our season really isn't long enough for that. I've done some cover crop gardening, but not a great deal. And there are other things that you need to do to prepare. But here, if it's springtime and you want to plant a garden and you haven't done any of those things to prepare, go ahead and do it. Go ahead and plant your garden. But take some time to watch some YouTube videos to get a little bit of a basic understanding of some of the things that you can do to ensure your success. The second reason that people seem to give up on gardening, well, so the first reason is they just don't plan ahead. They don't know what they're doing. They haven't prepared the ground. They just try to throw the plants into the ground and watch them grow. But the second reason is people tend to set unrealistic goals. One of those unrealistic goals might be that they want to plant too big a garden. I have 96,000 square foot of tilled ground, 96,000 square feet of tilled ground. And I plant my plants fairly long distances apart. If you look at the garden and you can see the pepper plants here, there's a lot of distance between them, and that means that I've got to do a lot of extra weeding because bare ground gives you a lot of empty ground that you have to weed or till, do something with. So it may not be the best plan for you. It seems to work out well for me. But taking on a garden of 96,000 square foot in your first attempt at gardening is a sure sign you're going to fail. On the other hand, too small a garden can also be a problem. It's a different problem, but it's a problem nonetheless. And the problem is when you take on too small of a garden, you can't plant enough in it. And so you try to plant too densely and everything just grows one thing into another and it becomes a jungle, a mess of plants that you can't quite sort out. So somewhere in there is the right size, and the idea is that you've got to figure that out. And that's part of your planning stage. But don't set unrealistic goals for yourself of planting a large market garden the very first time out of the box. Can you do it? Sure, you can. You can be successful. But it may take more effort than you're willing to put in. Another reason you might fail is you don't plan well enough ahead. Now, there's a couple of things that I include in my garden plans every year. First, what am I going to plant? Second, where am I going to plant it? Third, how am I going to keep the bugs away? And fourth, which is almost the same thing, how am I going to deal with the weeds? Am I going to go organic? Am I going to use a certain amount of chemical to make the job not only a little easier, but maybe even possible? But the point is you've got to decide what you're going to do and then plan it out. Plan it out with a calendar or at least a flow chart. So the way it works with me is that I will determine or decide how I'm going to weed my garden, for example, or how I'm going to take care of the insects. And then I'll write that down, and I'll write out a schedule, not a complete schedule. And I don't put it actually on a calendar, but I put the schedule out in such a way that I can refer back to that schedule and see where I'm at any given time. What should I be doing and when should I be doing it? For example, this garden right now, I need to get into these sweet potatoes and get all of this purslane, and there's a little bit of red root pigweed in there, maybe some velvet weed and some other things. I've got to get that out. Now, just because I scheduled it on a certain day, it should have been done today, doesn't mean I'm going to do it. We got an inch of rain at the end of the day yesterday, and this garden is really muddy. I don't really want to walk through it. So the point is that you have to already know what is the method that I'm going to use to make sure that I'm getting the weeds out and that I'm getting the insects at least managed. You know, if you wait until the last minute to come up with those things, first, the store may not have what you need. Secondly, you may not have the money to buy the thing you need. You know, some of these chemicals, especially the organic ones, are very expensive. And believe me, they're necessary. Look at this cabbage. Now, that's the first year that my cabbage have looked that bad. In the past, we haven't needed to use much in terms of insecticides. This year, insecticides have been a much bigger issue for us, and we weren't ready for it. In fact, as far as my potato plants are concerned, it almost devastated me. We should have gotten around 4,000 pounds of potatoes this year. Yeah, I said it, 4,000 pounds. But we didn't even get close to 1,000. In fact, we're probably closer to 400. Our onions did pretty well, but we had planned those out fairly well, and I had everything that I needed to take care of my onions before I started. So that's why I say you've got to plan things out. Start with a calendar and mark down when you're going to plant and what you're going to plant, and then create a cultivation schedule when you're going to get out and cultivate. Now, you can't just do it by the calendar because it's going to rain. You're going to get storms. You're going to get cold weather when you should have had warm weather. You're going to get hot weather when you should have had cold weather. And sometimes it's just a bad time to cultivate. It's just a bad time to spray or whatever it is that you're doing. So if you've got it planned out, it's much easier to change your plans. You know, rather than being completely unaware of what you need to do, it's very helpful to have a plan, and then as much as possible, work that plan. Work it, improve upon it, adjust it as necessary. I think the fourth reason why people fail when they try to garden, or give up when they try to garden, they fail to seriously articulate what their goals or what their purpose is. Now, again, if you're growing a 4x4 garden, maybe this step isn't important to you. But in a way, even a small garden, it becomes very important. Are you just trying to grow a few fruits and vegetables that you like? A few things that you find to be more tasty if you grow them yourself? Or are you trying to grow a garden to grow fruits and vegetables that aren't available in the store? Or are you trying to grow fruits and vegetables that are healthier and have a more robust nutrient content? Well, failing to really understand why you're gardening to really set a goal will ensure that you won't know if you've succeeded or failed. Someone much wiser than me once said, failing to plan is planning to fail. And I think that's true in the garden. I start ordering seeds by late December. Just after Christmas, I'll start the process of ordering my seeds. Now, long before then, I've been selecting my seeds. In fact, right now, even as I'm walking through the garden, I'm thinking about what I might plant next year. Now, where I'll plant it, that's already set forth. That's already part of the schedule. We're going to have potatoes down at that end of the field, and then right next to that will be our onions, and right next to that will be our brassicas, and our peppers will be all down in this section. That's all planned out. Oh, and our beets are going to be up there, and where we had onions this year. That's all planned out, and the reason it's planned out is because it's a rotational schedule that we follow from year to year to year to year. But if you fail to plan, rotation becomes a miserable thought. And if you don't set realistic goals, you won't know if you've succeeded or failed. It reminds me of a Charlie Brown cartoon where Charlie Brown was standing with a bow and arrow shooting arrows at a fence. And he'd shoot a couple arrows, and then he'd run over and he'd put circles around the arrows, pull the arrows out, and then he'd shoot again at the fence. And Lucy said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm target practicing." And she said, "Well, why are you putting circles around the arrows?" He said, "Those are bullseyes." And she said, "Well, you're supposed to shoot at the bullseye, not draw the bullseye on after you shoot." Charlie said, "It's easier this way." And Lucy said, "Charlie, you're a blockhead." Well, that's kind of what we do in gardening. We'll plant a bunch of stuff and hope that it comes up. And when it does, we pat ourselves on the back and we say we did a good job. And maybe we did. But you need to set goals for yourself. For me, the goals are actually financial goals. It's what I want to make at the market. And I try to be very realistic. We're not making a living wage doing market gardening, not by any stretch of the imagination. I actually barely cover my costs, but it's okay, because although my goals are financial goals, and eventually I do want to make somewhat of a living, success for me is not based on a financial principle. For example, this year my garden was a tremendous success. Now, I'll get back to that in a second. The fifth reason that people give up gardening or fail at gardening is because they don't forgive themselves for the mistakes that they make. Now, the first year that I planted a garden, it was about an 8 by 15 spot out back behind my house next to my garage. That wasn't on this piece of property. We weren't living here. And I planted a whole bunch of stuff. And of course, when it started coming up, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what the seed looked like, what the little plant looked like. And so I had no idea whether I was going to succeed or fail. I didn't know what the cotyledons looked like. And so I didn't know what was weed and what was plant. So I had set myself up for a sure failure, just simply because I hadn't done my research. As time went by, though, we started building on mistakes, and we built on mistakes, and we built on mistakes until now we've got a pretty good garden. You might notice that my pepper plants are laying down somewhat, and that's because last night we had a straight line wind that came through town, and actually it did quite a bit of damage a little bit north of us. A lot of big trees went down. It didn't damage us that much, but it did hurt our plants. It knocked the peppers over. I don't put cages on my peppers. It's not a practical thing for me to cage my peppers. So the final thing the main reason why people fail at gardening is because they don't forgive themselves. They don't accept the fact that learning is a big part of the whole deal. In fact, we've come to that point where I'm going to give you that final message. What do you have to do to ensure that you're going to succeed as a gardener? Let's go back to the shed, and I'm going to give you that answer. The key to being a successful gardener is this. Don't do it because it's enjoyable. Don't do it because it's easy. Don't do it because you think, well, anyone can do it. So, don't do it because you need it to survive. You don't need to garden to survive. You can go down to the grocery store. There might be a few people alive today, probably not watching this video, but there may be a few people who have to garden to survive. If you say, well, I'm gardening because it saves me on my grocery bill, well, if it's actually saving you on your grocery bill, you're an accomplished gardener. You've been doing it for a while. I can say that my garden will save me on my grocery bill. For example, today, I ate my lunch completely out of the garden. Yesterday, we had our dinner almost entirely out of the garden. And my breakfast this morning was entirely off the farm, not necessarily out of the garden. But for the most part, most people, the first couple of years, you're going to spend a lot more money than you're going to save. Buying trellises, buying the tools and equipment, whether it be a rototiller, a tractor, or even just a hoe and a shovel. If you don't have them already, it is going to cost money to buy them. So what's the key philosophy? What's the key idea? Have I baited you long enough? Do it because it's hard. That's really why we do things. Things that we really end up enjoying. Things that really end up bringing us satisfaction. We do them because they're difficult. Do it because not everyone can grow a garden. Do it because over the course of years, not days, weeks, or months, but over the course of years of trial and error, watching other people, YouTube's a great source for that, as I said earlier. Over the course of years, you'll develop skills. You'll develop patience, persistence, perseverance. We don't talk about patience and perseverance that much anymore. We can just go to the grocery store and buy an apple. We don't have to wait for it to grow on the tree. We can go to the store and buy a pie. We don't have to wait for it to come out of the oven. And perseverance, if you've ever grown a garden, you know that every day, you've got to walk through that garden. I was gone for 3 days, and I came back to weeds that I couldn't even believe. So, do it because it's hard. Do it for the challenge. Take on the avocation of gardening for the purpose of learning new skills. You'll meet a lot of interesting people along the way, especially if you go on YouTube. You may never meet them, but you'll converse with them. And you're going to learn a lot of skills that will persist even outside of the garden, even off the farm. Do it because it's hard. Gardening is a competitive activity. You're competing not with other gardeners, you're competing with insects, with weather, with weeds. Some people go fishing, some people go hunting. Some people play football or baseball. My wife likes to sew. I garden. It's a challenge. And I'm a better person because I'm gardening. What would I be doing if I wasn't in the garden? It scares me to think about that. Hey, I'm Chicken Johnny, and Mitzer Shem. I'll see you again. Eat your vegetables. Thanks for watching. Hey, if you haven't, hit that subscribe button. Thanks.